Hello and welcome to part 5 of putting Wagoneer Dana 44s under my Jeep XJ. Since the last update, I have the hubs painted, the rotors are painted, the knuckles I believe were painted, and the short side of the axles, the ends anyways, were painted. What is next is me putting the races into the hub. This, I believe, is the outer race. There is two races to be installed. There's the inner and the outer. They cannot be mistaken for the wrong size because they're actually completely different sizes. You also, or rather, they're also supposed to be matched together. Like there's a match for a race and a bearing, they go together. You're not supposed to mix them up. Once you have the race all dropped down into where it's supposed to go ahead and grab the brass punch and the hammer and hit to each opposite side of the race. I believe I've explained this a couple different times, but not with hitting in a race or a bearing. It's the same deal. If you don't, it'll go on crooked and you'll have problems getting it to move any further. It's a fairly simple process. You should be able to handle it. And it'll move. It might not seem like it's moving, but it will move a little bit with every hit. And just so you know, it's a good idea to push aside all of your other vices while you're doing this process, otherwise it'll cause problems for you. Now, when you're hitting it, you'll know when it's seated because it'll make a different sound. It's hard to explain, but it'll make a different sound and it'll feel different in your hand as you're hitting it. And at which point, you'll know that it's the process for hitting the inner racing on the hub is pretty much the same as the other side. Just make sure you have the right race matched up with the right bearing, and just drop it in and start hitting it with the brass punch, just like before. Start with one side, then go to the other, and swip back and forth. Otherwise, it won't go in it will go in crooked. I'm gonna go ahead and fast forward to the end because you've already seen it once, and I don't think you can see it again. Ta-da! And here is the final few hits to get the race seated. And then I go ahead and grab a rag because there are a couple shavings off the brass punch that I had to wipe out. You'll probably have to do the same thing if you're ever doing this, and that's that. Next on the list was this needle style bearing that needed to be pushed into the spindle. What I ended up doing was taking the old bearing and grounding down the edges so it could fit into the spindle easily. And that way I could just use the old bearing to hit the new bearing in nice and square. Now, the reason I did this is because there's not an easy way to do it with a brass punch without damaging the little needle bearing. Now, these needle bearings, they do actually go in only one way. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe one side is flat and one side is rounded. So you have to pay attention when you're taking the old one out, which way it goes. And you can see what I was doing here is just using the old bearing to hit it in nice and square. Here it is most of the way down in. And I believe this is it. The second you'll see me just take the old bearing right out because of me grounding down the edges. And then I just went and stuck my finger in there to make sure I didn't damage it, and it turned out alright. I just didn't repeat the process for the other side. Of course, the job wouldn't be complete without a test fit of the little short side of the axle, which goes in like that, and it spins nice, brand new bearings, fucking beautiful feeling. And then, of course, you just gotta pull out. And then came time to put the hub and the rotor back together. Now, due to camera operator error, I didn't actually record the first part of this, but it's fairly simple. Basically, you just put the hub back into the rotor. It doesn't have to be the same rotor, just as long as it's one of them. And then what I did, you don't necessarily have to, but what I did do is take anti-seize and put it against the two faces that touch on the hub and the rotor, basically the seam there. Then all you do is just gather up your studs, make sure they're not damaged in any way, because since they're out, this is a good time to replace them if they're damaged. And then put a little bit of bead of anti-seize around the outside of the stud, and then feed it back into the holes. Then all it's going to do is grab a nice big chisel, or a punch rather, not a chisel, a punch, and then a big hammer, and just start hitting away. And they will go back together. At first it'll be easy, then they'll start to tighten up a little bit, but they'll eventually seat all the way like they're supposed to. And that's pretty much it. The only thing you really have to make sure you do is put the anti-seize around the stud, because otherwise it'll be pretty hard to get them in. The anti-seize between the hub and the rotor seam isn't necessary, but I figured I'd do it just to make sure they don't get stuck together again. And that's that. The last step of this day was to go ahead and wire wheel the caliper brackets. They were in pretty rough shape, so it actually took some doing to do right. And of course, what I also did, because they were in rough shape and they were really crusty, is I took a cold chisel and a hammer and then hit all of the extra chunks of rust that were left behind. This will, in the end, make them look a lot better, and there were a lot of them, so it'll be worth it. And that concludes part 6 of getting Wagoneer Dana 44s under my Jeep XJ.